So imagine this. You save a tiny crying octopus one day, and years later she comes back as a gorgeous monster girl who instantly decides you're her future husband. Meanwhile, you're just trying to survive your 40-year-old teacher salary. Let's get into it.
In the middle of a vast sea, there was a tiny island where a small octopus eagerly waved its tentacle, hoping to answer the teacher's question about snow. The teacher, a middle-aged man, went on to explain that snow forms when water is both generated and condensed simultaneously. This kind of magic, which involved the activation of two phenomena at once, was considered A-level. He mentioned that if the students started practicing, they might just be able to make it snow one day. As soon as he finished explaining, the curious octopus turned to the teacher, ready to spill its deepest thoughts. The little octopus confessed that when it grows up, it wants to become human. This desire was praiseworthy and even encouraged in the class. But the octopus didn't just want to become human for the sake of it, it wanted to become human so it could marry the teacher. With that in mind, the octopus propped its head up, staring dreamily at the man. However, another little creature in the class wasn't too thrilled about this bold declaration. She also had her heart set on marrying the teacher. The teacher, slightly taken aback by where their aspirations were heading, couldn't help but question the students further, trying to clarify the details of their rather unusual ambitions. The little octopus stared at her tentacles and felt a wave of insecurity wash over her. She thought she was just too different from humans, and to make matters worse, she feared the teacher might dislike her because she was a monster. The more she dwelled on this, the more her body began to tremble, and tears welled up in her eyes as she imagined the worst, thinking that he would hate her and leave her behind. Noticing her distress, the teacher felt a pang of sympathy. He gently cupped her cheeks and whispered reassuringly that he would never do such a thing. Lifting the octopus up, he thought this was the perfect moment to share everything he wanted to say to his students. Many years passed, and things had changed quite a bit. In the heart of the Medium Kingdom, a towering structure that resembled a castle now stood, surrounded by a sprawling town with multiple levels. This was the Munis Inium Academy. After a long day of lessons, the students were utterly exhausted, their only desire being to get home as quickly as possible. Two girls, busy packing their things into their briefcases, briskly made their way to the main doors, chatting about their plans for the day. Suddenly, one of them bumped into a man. It turned out to be a teacher, his tie haphazardly stuffed into his shirt pocket. Realizing his mistake, he quickly apologized and asked if the student was okay. But when she saw who she had run into, her face went pale. Her eyes darted nervously, and sweat began to form on her forehead. Grabbing her friend's arm, they bolted from the scene, clutching their belongings tightly. As they fled, she shouted to her friend about the horror of running into old Washio, and how she couldn't stand his ancient smell. Washio sighed heavily as he overheard their harsh words but managed to maintain an awkward smile. He didn't consider himself old at all. He wasn't too thrilled that they had changed the kanji in his name to invent new nicknames for him. After all, he was only a little over 40, and there shouldn't have been any old man smell since he wore fresh clothes every day. As Washio trudged down the hallway, staring sadly at his clothes, something caught his eye. A stunning girl stood before him, a massive suitcase behind her, glancing around as if looking for help. Her beauty was so striking that it seemed she could enchant anyone with just a look. But as a teacher, Washio knew he couldn't let himself get carried away by such thoughts. With a quick slap to his cheek, he pushed aside all unnecessary thoughts and decided to help the lost-looking student. It was the first time he had ever seen her, but what puzzled him more was why she had such heavy luggage at the academy. Realizing that asking about her luggage might be awkward, he opted for a different approach. Washio asked why she was standing still and offered to guide her to the right classroom. The girl looked at him in surprise, and before he could react, she suddenly hugged him. Washio was completely caught off guard. He stood frozen in place, unable to reciprocate the hug. His thoughts grew even more suspicious as he noticed other students in the hallway squinting at him and whispering to each other. Feeling increasingly uncomfortable, Washio politely asked the girl to let him go before the situation escalated, but she didn't budge. After a few more awkward minutes, the girl finally pulled back and, with a desperate tone, begged Washio to show her the way to the principal's office. She explained that she had forgotten to take a map of the school and had gotten lost. Washio, still trying to keep his composure, told her that the office was on the 4th floor and suggested she consult the identification book, which had a map in it. Determined, the girl crouched down and started rummaging through her suitcase, hoping to find her student ID. But things went wrong. Her suitcase was filled with clothes and hygiene items, not the school essentials she was searching for. She blushed and apologized, explaining that the suitcase was supposed to be delivered to the dormitory, but something had gotten mixed up. Now she had lost both her ID and her map. Seeing her on the verge of tears, Washio took a seat across from her. He gently stroked her head, trying to comfort her like a parent would. He reminded her that everyone makes mistakes when they're in a hurry, and that staying calm would help her find a solution. His words seemed to work. The girl stopped crying and even managed a small smile as she listened to his advice. Once she had composed herself, she thanked him, realizing that if she lost her ID, she could simply request a new one from the academic affairs office. As Washio let go of her hair, she began to fix it, though she seemed a bit annoyed. She whispered to herself to stay calm and avoid mistakes, as if repeating a piece of ancient wisdom. Washio's gaze softened as he watched the girl, who had been so desperately seeking help just moments before. He couldn't help but reflect on his past as an office worker, where he had always tried to stay positive, even when things went wrong. But his moment of nostalgia was cut short when he noticed the girl staring at him in surprise, clearly confused by his rambling about his office job. Realizing he was getting off track, Washio quickly apologized for his silly comments and said goodbye, trying to leave on a pleasant note. Washio picked up his clipboard, his feet dragging sluggishly as he went about his errands. His frustration was written all over his face, so much so that the girl he had just helped felt a pang of guilt for being a burden with her luggage. She sighed, placing a finger on her chin, wondering if he had even remembered her. Meanwhile, Washio had already entered the teacher's lounge, where everyone else was busy with their own tasks. Most of the staff didn't really see him as a coworker, and while they enjoyed their breaks, he was the only one who continued to slog away behind piles of paperwork. One of the teachers, Lin Noah, took advantage of Washio's kindness, magically poking him with a stack of questionnaires that he should have been doing himself. Lin Noah was notorious for dumping his duties on others, but Washio wasn't in the mood to take on extra work. He tried to excuse himself by claiming he would be cleaning classrooms today, hoping to escape the additional burden. But Lin Noah wasn't having it. He plopped the papers down on Washio's desk, advising him to come up with a better excuse next time. Lin Noah, who was quite full of himself, believed that such tedious tasks were beneath him and perfect for someone like Washio. He bragged about his responsibilities with the Louvre Division of Magical Studies, where he had managed to organize a tournament without a hitch. The director had naturally started to take pride in the club's success, all thanks to Lin Noah, or so he claimed. His endless boasting gave Washio a headache, but he knew he couldn't do much about it. With a tired rub of his head, Washio decided to give it one last shot to get rid of him. He replied perfectly calm that it would be an honor to help such a talented teacher like Lin Noah. The moment those words left Washio's mouth, Lin Noah's eyes sparkled with contentment. Thinking he had won, he quickly headed for the door, leaving Washio staring after him, puzzled by what made this man tick. Lin Noah paused before exiting, throwing a sneer Washio's way, as if to remind him who the pathetic one was. He knew Washio wouldn't fight back, and true to form, Washio was always the last one to leave the school. Today was no exception. By the time Washio got off work, it was late at night, and the stars were already burning brightly in the sky. Exhausted and hungry, he found himself stopping in front of a pub. The loud voices of people ordering food and drinks inside tempted him to go in, but he reluctantly passed by the brightly lit sign. His wallet was empty, and indulging in such a luxury was out of the question. So, he trudged forward through the dark streets, heading home. His house wasn't far, and it didn't take long to get there. Washio tried to sneak up the creaky stairs quietly, hoping to avoid waking anyone, but as soon as he reached the top, an elderly woman, the landlady, appeared behind him, greeting him kindly. Startled, Washio hadn't expected to wake her, and he was a bit confused by her sudden appearance. But she hadn't come out for no reason. She had brought him some leftovers from the table for dinner. Grateful, Washio thanked her sincerely and apologized for the inconvenience. He was about to continue to his room when the landlady asked why he couldn't find a wife to welcome him home with freshly cooked meals. Washio forced a smile, pretending the question didn't bother him. Everyone knew that for a low-ranking teacher like him, such a luxury was out of reach. The landlady didn't argue, merely confirming his statement before wishing him good night and retreating to her room. As soon as she left, Washio's smile faded, and his heart sank. There was no point in lingering on the stairs, so he continued up to the second floor. His room was a mess, with empty liquor bottles strewn about, but it didn't seem to bother him. Without even bothering to take off his shoes or clothes, he sat on his bed, clutching the bundle of food in his hands. The landlady hadn't just given him scraps, she'd made a delicious vegetable sandwich. He savored every bite, and once he finished the last morsel, he lay back, feeling the heaviness in his body that had accumulated over the day. The landlady's words wouldn't leave his mind. The idea of getting married seemed simple enough, but in reality, it felt like an insurmountable challenge. The more he thought about it, the more complicated it seemed. Frustrated, he abandoned the thoughts and began to undress, heading to the shower. Under the warm water, his mind began to drift back to his past, memories flooding in without him even realizing it. Over a decade ago, Washio was just a simple office worker with no hope for advancement. He had no girlfriend and spent all his free time playing video games. After work, he'd come home and lose himself in collections of famous quotes, trying to find some meaning in his ordinary life. It was so uneventful that he often dreamed of escaping to another dimension, a fantasy that surprisingly came true. One day, he was summoned to a new world where he was hailed as a legendary hero. His duties as a hero weren't glamorous. He wandered through destroyed villages, hoping to find survivors, but luck wasn't on his side. The only life he managed to save was that of a huge black spider, which leaned on him in gratitude. Determined to keep the creature alive, he protected it with all his might. Unfortunately, not everyone saw the spider as something worth saving. Someone eventually captured it and subjected it to horrible experiments. Washio's eyes widened in horror when he saw the spider trapped in a giant flask, tubes attached to its body. The sight was so terrifying that he jolted awake in bed, struggling to distinguish between nightmare and reality. He sat there, drenched in cold sweat, hands covering his face, but no amount of wiping could erase the haunting memory. The burden of failing the people who had counted on him weighed heavily on his conscience. That's how he ended up as a mere professor at the academy, far from the heroic life he once imagined. Trying to shake off the memories of those terrible events, Washio stepped out onto the balcony for some fresh air. After everything that happened, he tried to start anew in this world, but it didn't lead to anything remarkable. He hadn't even managed to get married. As he lit a cigarette, he reflected on his accomplishments, or lack thereof in this world. In his own eyes, he was just an average old man with a bit of magic. The only bright spot in his life was the time he spent with his students, like the little octopus. Those moments brought a smile to his face, and he could replay them in his mind for hours. They were, without a doubt, the most fun he'd ever had. With a sigh, he stubbed out his cigarette on the balcony railing, tossed it in the trash, and headed back to his room. It was time for bed, and thankfully, the nightmares didn't return, making the morning arrive quicker than expected. After a restless sleep, Washio grabbed the first clothes he could find and rushed to the academy. He made it just in time, though he looked a bit disheveled. Lenoa, ever the critic, stood up when he arrived and asked if Washio had even bothered to wash his shirt before leaving the house. Washio inspected his clothes and asked if they really smelled that bad, prompting Lenoa to cover his nose with a handkerchief. Before Washio could respond, the principal appeared, silencing the room with his presence. He began his speech, mentioning the arrival of a monster girl at the school, a significant event that had everyone talking. Naturally, Washio was clueless about this and asked Lenoa what all the fuss was about. Lenoa, ever sarcastic, couldn't believe Washio's ignorance, and condescendingly explained that it was to be expected. With a smirk, Lenoa finally relented and explained that monster girls were mutants of various kinds of monsters. They possessed intelligence far surpassing that of elves, had exceptional physical abilities, and were known for their stunning beauty, resembling young human girls. Despite being born as monsters, it remained a mystery why they took on human forms or what motivated them to do so. They were rare, so not many people even knew they existed. Washio, impressed by Lenoa's knowledge, offered some praise, but Lenoa brushed it off, calling it just superficial information. However, he couldn't resist pointing out that as a biology teacher, Washio should at least know the basics. Washio chuckled, admitting his incompetence in this area, and tried to defuse the situation by joking that he only specialized in lower-ranking monsters. Noah, unimpressed, suggested they end the conversation and return to listening to the principal, who had just been handed the microphone. The principal, a man with imposing horns on his head, led the gathering with a fervent prayer and praised the talented government officials and high-ranking officers who had promised a prosperous future for all. These individuals were part of the elite, and their words carried weight. After a lengthy speech, he asked the new female student to join them. She had been waiting nearby, and as soon as she crossed the threshold, the entire room fell silent in awe. Noah was stunned, unable to believe that someone like her would be attending their school. Washio, on the other hand, could only stare in surprise at the back of this mysterious newcomer. The principal, honored by her presence, welcomed her to the school, which boasted the strongest and most talented teachers. With a graceful wave, she greeted everyone, introducing herself as Claudia, a member of the Kraken species. Whispers of admiration for her beauty filled the room as everyone leaned forward, eager to catch a glimpse of the new student. Washio, still trying to see who had entered, was shocked to realize that Claudia was the same student he had encountered the previous day. The principal, with great respect, offered Claudia a week to review the teachers and choose the one she felt most comfortable with. However, she declined the offer, stating that she already had someone in mind. With deliberate steps, Claudia moved forward, heightening the suspense in the room. Dozens of teachers watched anxiously, waiting to see whom she would select. They didn't have to wait long. Claudia stood before her chosen teacher and, with a soft smile, said, "Long time no see." The words sent shockwaves through the room. Claudia revealed her true nature, releasing her tentacles, a clear sign that she was indeed a monster. Though many were startled by her sudden transformation, no one fled. Claudia's eyes sparkled as she waited for a reaction from Washio, but he stood frozen, struggling to place her. The smile on Claudia's face slowly faded as she realized he didn't recognize her. Washio, despite his best efforts, couldn't recall ever seeing her before. But then, like a flash, a memory surfaced. Washio remembered the octopus girl he had once trained. Claudia's affectionate voice pulled him back to a time of chaos and destruction, to the day of countless explosions, and the image of an octopus in a broken glass tube that had haunted him for years. He had believed that he failed to save her. The only thing that had stayed with him was the feeling of the wet tentacle that had once wrapped around his arm in a moment of trust. But that was a long time ago. The tentacles had been replaced by a warm, human hand. Claudia thanked her savior for not abandoning her that day, for giving her a chance at life. Now, as she had promised on that distant island, she had returned as a monster girl, ready to fulfill her vow with full confidence. The morning after Claudia's unexpected appearance, Washio was still preoccupied with thoughts from the previous day and ended up sleeping through most of the night. As a result, he woke up late and scrambled to get to the academy. His bag slipped off his shoulder as he ran as fast as he could, trying to make up for lost time. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out to him, causing him to stop abruptly. Claudia, having crossed paths with him on her way to school, greeted him cheerfully. The boys around them looked on with envy as Claudia waved and hurried over to him. Although Washio was out of breath, he managed to return the greeting. Noticing how difficult it was for him to run, Claudia suggested a quicker way to get to school. Before Washio could fully understand her plan, a tentacle wrapped around his arm, and Claudia took off running toward the academy, pulling him along. The sensation of being lifted off the ground felt almost like flying, but the rush of wind against his face quickly reminded him of their speed as they maneuvered through the crowd. Thanks to Claudia's swift and unconventional method, they arrived at the academy right before the bell rang, making it to class on time. Washio had recently been assigned as Claudia's personal teacher, which led to a noticeable drop in the number of students in his classroom. He placed the papers on his desk and felt a wave of relief for not being late to the academy for the first time in a month. Claudia, pleased by his gratitude, happily promised to visit his house daily from now on. Although it was somewhat embarrassing, Washio knew he couldn't easily dissuade her. As her mentor, Washio felt a bit like he was paying his dues, given that Claudia was the very creature he had once saved. Claudia, who had once been a small octopus the size of a ball, had grown so much that Washio hardly recognized her. Despite his initial discomfort, he couldn't help but smile as Claudia laughed cheerfully and complimented him, calling him great as always. At the teachers' council, a question arose about Claudia and Washio's relationship. Some members questioned whether it was appropriate for a student to be mentored by someone they knew, suggesting that a more qualified teacher might be better suited. The principal, however, dismissed these concerns, stating that he had confidence in Washio and preferred to let the decision stand. With that, Claudia and Washio left the council room and headed back to class. Limnoa, unable to let go of his frustration, stopped them halfway and argued that Claudia should be assigned a teacher of equal or higher rank, rather than a ranky professor like Washio. Claudia, clearly upset, objected to Limnoa's comments, finding it rude to refer to Washio solely by his rank. Limnoa was taken aback by her defense, but Washio, feeling exhausted, simply sighed. During class, Claudia noticed Washio's distracted state and asked if he was all right. Washio, scratching his head, dismissed her concern, stating it was nothing major. He then resumed the lesson, pulling out a sheet from his clipboard and asking Claudia about her experiences since starting at the academy. Claudia, pleased by his interest, shared that she had been enjoying the classes, especially biology. Washio, gratified by her positive response, thanked her. However, when Washio handed Claudia a form to fill out regarding her future, she became visibly distressed. The form was intended to outline her career path, something that was supposed to be straightforward given her potential. As a monster girl, Claudia was expected to pursue a high-ranking position, ideally in the king's department. Claudia, feeling cornered by this expectation, had hoped to forge her own path. She was disheartened by the pressure to follow a predetermined route, especially since her classmates and teachers had emphasized that all monster girls should follow this trajectory. Claudia had hoped for more flexibility in her future, but was met with rigid expectations and a lack of regard for her personal desires. As Claudia recounted the pressure she faced to conform to expectations, Washio listened quietly, his expression one of concern. He had his own thoughts and advice, but found himself at a loss for words. He felt inadequate to offer guidance on such a personal matter, considering his own limited experience and the complexities Claudia was facing. Despite her hopeful gaze, Washio hesitated, unsure of how to help. In the end, he told her to stay relaxed and take things lightly, before heading towards the door. Claudia remained in the now empty classroom, her sadness evident as she watched him leave. Lunchtime arrived, and the cafeteria buzzed with students eager to refuel after a demanding morning. Washio, with only a few sandwiches on his tray, wandered the hall looking for a place to sit. His meal was modest, reflecting his current financial constraints. As he moved through the crowd, Claudia spotted him and, with a burst of energy, wrapped him in one of her tentacles, startling him. Observing his meager lunch, she expressed concern, questioning if he had enough to eat and reminding him of the importance of proper nourishment. Despite Claudia's eagerness to follow the advice of her mentor, she faced an unexpected challenge when Limnoa intervened. As she prepared to hand over the completed form to Washio, Limnoa abruptly snatched it from her hands. With a dismissive sneer, he read through the form and, showing no respect, crumpled it into a ball. His anger was palpable as he berated Claudia for her decision, declaring that she was too talented to settle for a mere teaching position. Instead, he insisted she should aim for a prestigious role, such as a royal officer, and not waste her potential. Claudia, taken aback and frightened by Limnoa's authoritative demeanor, felt cornered and disheartened. Washio, who had been nearby, saw the unfolding scene and decided to intervene. He approached with a strained smile, trying to handle the situation delicately. He remarked that as a teacher, it was unacceptable to disregard a student's personal aspirations. Limnoa's temper flared at Washio's remarks, his frustration growing. He could not comprehend why Washio would support Claudia's wishes instead of pushing for higher aspirations. He argued heatedly that allowing a monster girl to choose her own path was a disservice to her potential and the world at large. The cafeteria, filled with students, fell silent as they witnessed the confrontation. Claudia, struggling to maintain composure, tried to calm the situation, but Limnoa's rage seemed unstoppable. As Limnoa's fury reached a peak, he declared that a talented student like Claudia should be learning from an A-ranked professor, not a mere E-ranked teacher. Washio, despite the tension, agreed with the general sentiment that Claudia deserved the best education possible, but he also recognized the importance of respecting her personal choices. Seeing Limnoa's unwavering stance, Claudia decided to take matters into her own hands. Frustrated with his continued interference, she reached out with her tentacles, placing a cold, wet mark on his neck and face. The unexpected sensation startled Lenoa, making him recoil in fear. As he turned toward Claudia, she swiftly retracted her tentacles, her expression firm and resolute. With a furrowed brow, Claudia demanded that Lenoa leave Washio alone. She declared that Washio had supported her dreams from the beginning, granting her the freedom to pursue her own path. She had no intention of allowing anyone but him to be her mentor. Claudia recalled a phrase Washio had once shared with her during a difficult time. Know yourself. These words had stayed with her, serving as a guiding principle through the years. Claudia placed her finger on her face and smiled, whispering the phrase softly. The surrounding crowd fell silent, reflecting on the meaning of her words. Each person interpreted the phrase in their own way, and even Lenoa struggled to grasp its significance. The phrase was Washio's way of encouraging Claudia to recognize and confront her fears, turning them into strengths. Washio was taken aback by her gesture and the fact that she had carried his words with her for so long. In that intense moment, as Claudia stood firm and determined, memories from the past surged through Washio's mind. He recalled the time when the octopus he had once saved expressed her dreams of becoming human and even marrying him. Back then, she felt self-conscious about her appearance and feared rejection, doubting that anyone could love her as she was. Washio, however, reassured her, lifting her into the air and squeezing her cheeks affectionately, making her look adorably vulnerable. He told her, "Know yourself," a phrase he had often used to encourage others to look within and discover their own strengths. For years, Washio had shared this lesson with his students, teaching them that before envying others, they should search for their own unique qualities and talents. He wanted them to focus on improving what they already had rather than longing for what they lacked. His interpretation of the phrase, though open to various philosophical perspectives, was simple and sincere. He believed that by embracing and developing one's own abilities, one could achieve greatness. Seeing Claudia as an adult now, Washio marveled at how this seemingly simple advice had profoundly impacted her. She had carried his words with her through her journey, from a small octopus to a remarkable monster girl. It filled him with happiness to see her succeed and fulfill her dreams. Claudia, placing a tentacle gently on Washio's shoulder, publicly acknowledged his role in helping her accept and embrace her abilities. She declared that he was the one responsible for her growth and, by extension, her studies. Lenoa's rage intensified as he listened to Claudia's heartfelt words, his anger bubbling over into a nearly uncontrollable fury. Surrounded by a sea of students, who watched the confrontation unfold with growing discomfort, he questioned what might become of Claudia under the tutelage of an old and seemingly ineffectual teacher like Washio. His expectation of rallying support crumbled as the students voiced their belief in Washio's value, despite his age and quirks. The children's comments stung Lenoa deeply, painting him as an unreasonable figure, and his frustration boiled over as they pointed out his tendency to insist on his own infallibility. Feeling humiliated and defeated, Lenoa clenched his fists, his face flushed with anger. He struggled to maintain his composure as he listened to the students defend Washio. His reaction, a rare display of raw emotion, left the students and Washio alike in shock. Lenoa gritted his teeth and abruptly fled the scene, vowing to remember the encounter and take his revenge. With Lenoa's departure, the tension in the cafeteria eased, and Washio, momentarily disoriented by the unexpected turn of events, found himself at a loss for words. Claudia, ever perceptive, gently brought him back to the present by suggesting they return to the cafeteria and buy lunch. She wrapped a tentacle around his arm, guiding him through the bustling space. As they approached the display case, Claudia, now a confident and capable monster girl, seemed eager to embrace her new role as a student and, eventually, a teacher. Washio felt a profound sense of fulfillment, recognizing that despite the challenges, his decision to become a teacher was worth every effort. He was glad to see Claudia thriving and achieving her dreams, even if it meant being reminded of his teachings from 2 decades ago. Lost in contemplation, Washio suddenly realized he had forgotten to bring any money for lunch. Embarrassed by his lapse, he hesitated before asking Claudia for a favor. He promised to repay her by the following week, grateful for her understanding and support. Claudia was on duty as a demonstration creature at Washio's request, showing off her skills to the students. Washio was explaining to the class that when surrounded by monster girls, you should never let your guard down. These girls weren't just about magic and poison, they had some serious strength too. To drive the point home, Claudia casually squeezed a tentacle around a stone and crushed it into bits, sending debris flying across the classroom. As the biology class, held under the dragon's crest, wrapped up, students filed out, cheering as they went. Many of the students were too scared to get close to Claudia, worried she might be dangerous, but she was way friendlier than they'd expected. Still, some kept their distance. After all, she was a monster. Claudia, hanging out by the blackboard with Washio, noticed that more and more students were showing up at the office lately. Washio told her it was all thanks to her. Whenever he asked for help with cleaning, she was more than happy to oblige, seeing it as a chance to spend time with him. Claudia was always up for any task, and Washio couldn't help but laugh at how eager she was. As Claudia approached, Washio was busy wiping the already clean board. She pointed out a spot at the top that he couldn't reach. Normally, you'd have to lower the board, but Claudia wasn't one for taking the long route. She simply grabbed another duster, slipped it over her tentacle, and reached up to wipe away the marks. Even though Washio knew about her octopus tentacles, watching her use them to clean up there still caught him off guard. He found himself muttering something about how convenient it was. Realizing he might have sounded silly, Washio quickly apologized, but Claudia wasn't offended at all. If anything, she was flattered. She grabbed another duster and kept cleaning, whispering to Washio about just how useful her tentacles were. Sliding them closer to him, she started listing their perks. They could stretch and shrink, be straight or wriggle around. Then, wrapping her arms around Washio's neck, she casually mentioned that they were perfect for crushing rocks, thanks to their strength. Washio tensed up, pretty freaked out by that last part. But then Claudia broke into a smile and added that they were just as great for giving massages. Washio soon found out she wasn't kidding. Her tentacles started crawling up his back, and it felt like he was getting a professional massage. He even thought this could be a hit service that could make Claudia a fortune. The massage was so good, in fact, that his legs gave out, and he ended up plopping down on the floor. Claudia placed the duster back in its holder, and then took a seat across from Washio, casually suggesting that he experience an even better massage. Her tentacles began to move around him in smooth, almost hypnotic motions, gently stroking him. Each tentacle had a different feel. Some were warm, while others were cool, even through his clothes. One tentacle wrapped around his legs and another around his arm, giving him a surprisingly soothing sensation. It didn't last long, though. After just a few minutes, Claudia suddenly stopped, raising her hands with a playful grin as she admitted she was just kidding. Washio felt a cold sweat drip down his forehead. Being pestered by a girl who didn't quite follow human norms was unnerving, to say the least. Claudia leaned in close, her face just inches from his, and asked if he enjoyed the massage. When he didn't answer, she started pestering him more, asking what he was thinking about so intently that he stopped paying attention to her. After everything that had happened, Washio had no desire to be alone with her anymore. Desperate for an escape, he pointed to the door and urged her to hurry up since the next class was about to start. Claudia, clearly not thrilled by his response, pouted and turned away. She didn't want to leave, she wanted to spend more time with him. But with no other option, she reluctantly said goodbye and ran to the exit, already looking forward to seeing him at lunch. Once she was gone, Washio sighed in exhaustion. Dealing with a girl as unpredictable as Claudia was no easy task. All the excitement had drained him, and he found himself crawling under the table, the only place where he could finally catch a break. As Claudia walked slowly down the hall, she crossed not just her arms but her tentacles too, feeling a bit frustrated. Gaining Washio's admiration was proving to be more difficult than she'd expected, but she wasn't ready to give up. With a new plan forming in her mind, she hurried off to her next class. Meanwhile, an elegant carriage stopped near the gates of the academy. A girl in a beautiful white dress stepped out, holding her hair up as she gazed into the building's windows. She wondered if her teacher, Washio, still remembered her. Back in his room, Washio lay in bed, reflecting on the crazy day he'd had at school. The experience with Claudia's tentacles was unlike anything he'd ever gone through before. He couldn't shake the memory of how warm and slimy they felt, and as he drifted off to sleep, nightmares of those tentacles wrapping around him filled his mind. Washio finally had a day off without any overtime, a rare, precious miracle that he didn't want anything to ruin. He had so many plans for the day, so he stretched his arms and walked through the bustling square, completely unaware that someone was following him. A ringing female voice called out his name, followed by the clatter of heels. While he was still stretching, a girl suddenly ran up behind him and hugged him affectionately, catching him completely off guard. He had no idea what was happening, and when he turned to see who it was, he panicked and jumped back, falling to the ground with a scream. The pretty girl, wearing a hat, greeted him with a cute, "Long time no see," though many people around them were giving her strange looks. Washio, still sitting on the ground, glanced at the onlookers and then at the girl, clearly confused. He had no idea who she was, and it showed. The girl smiled sweetly, covering her mouth with her hand in an elegant gesture, realizing that her appearance and personality had changed a lot since they last met. To jog his memory, she began to lift the hem of her dress slightly, exposing her thighs just a bit. Washio stared at her in bewilderment, wondering why on earth she would do something so reckless in public. Then, 3 pairs of thin spider legs, previously hidden, emerged from beneath her clothes as she curtsied. She revealed that she was the monster girl he had once rescued. The sight of this creature caused quite a stir among the passers-by, who quickly gathered around to witness the spectacle. Washio, however, was too shocked to say anything, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. Left with no other choice, he reluctantly invited her to dinner, since she clearly wanted to talk. As they entered the restaurant, the Spider-Woman marveled at its design, her first time in such a small and quaint establishment. The waiter, however, wasn't as impressed, asking her to take a seat at a table. She glanced up at the ceiling, noticing the dilapidated chandelier with genuine curiosity. She eventually sat down beside a dirty barrel that served as a chair, even admiring it. The waiter, growing increasingly irritated, couldn't believe how openly his establishment was being insulted. He approached Washio, pointing out that while his companion was beautiful, she clearly lacked manners. He even turned pale with frustration before apologizing for her behavior. Washio, feeling the tension, admitted it was his first time bringing someone to this restaurant and asked the waiter for a bit of leniency. After all, sitting at an empty table felt awkward, so he requested a slightly better dish than what he usually ordered. While he was sorting things out, the Spider-Woman placed her hat in Washio's lap, her curiosity about the building still piqued as she peered around every corner. Soon their food arrived. The girl, unfazed by the attention of others, tucked her hair behind her ear and took a bite of some fried meat skewers. She chewed slowly, savoring the flavor, but it was clear she wasn't impressed. She finally remarked that it was the first time she had been served meat so dry and with such a bad smell. Washio felt a pang of guilt for his companion, especially as the other diners seemed to be captivated by her beauty. He quickly asked her to stop saying anything negative before the owner decided to kick them out. The monster girl, though, didn't understand why she was being reproached. She was sure she hadn't said anything bad and insisted that she was actually delighted with the restaurant, which was unique to the city. To top it off, she introduced herself, smiling sweetly and asking to be called Aria from now on. The name seemed to enchant those around her. Some admired it, others whispered how perfectly it suited her, and everyone appreciated her elegance. No matter who was in the establishment, everyone seemed to take a liking to Aria. As Washio sipped his drink, he couldn't believe how much Aria had changed. Once, she was just a shy spider girl, modestly weaving cobwebs in the corner of the classroom. Now, she had transformed into a beautiful woman who could easily pass as human. Lowering her gaze, Aria reminisced about those old days, back when she couldn't accept herself. It was only because of Washio and his kind words back then that she had been able to achieve so much more. Washio, however, didn't quite catch what she was getting at and simply raised his mug. Suddenly, Aria's heart fluttered as she spoke of eagerly awaiting her first lesson with her teacher, wondering what magic he would teach her. But since the conversation had turned in that direction, Washio clarified that he was now just a simple biology teacher. The shock of his words nearly made Aria drop her meat skewer. She didn't understand why he had decided to change his job and asked in a raised voice why he had done it. Washio, though, seemed unconcerned. On the surface, he appeared content, smiling at the people around them, but in reality, he was just avoiding the topic. Thankfully, Aria picked up on this and didn't press further, though she sighed tiredly as she continued eating. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, so Washio decided to change the subject. He asked if Aria remembered Claudia, the octopus who had become a real monster girl and was now his apprentice. Though Washio was glad that Claudia had grown and become his equal, There was still a strange feeling lingering in his heart, especially since he had to spend every lunchtime with someone so obsessively attached to him. Claudia had once dismissed her behavior as just an octopus habit, but compared to the past, she had clearly changed. With every mention of Claudia, Aria's good mood seemed to drift further away. She struggled to keep her jealousy in check, unable to bear hearing any more about the octopus girl. Finally, unable to take it anymore, she lifted her wooden mug and dramatically ordered the 5 most expensive dishes on the menu. Washio could practically feel his wallet crumbling under the weight of the bill that was coming. The food was devoured quickly, the drinks downed, and soon the table was left with nothing but dirty dishes stained with leftover sauce. As they stepped outside, Arya thanked Washio for his hospitality and emphasized that he didn't need to pay for her. However, Washio insisted that it was no problem, though he knew he'd be eating bread alone for the next week. As they approached the main street, Washio kindly offered to walk Arya back to the dormitory since they had spent quite a long time in the restaurant. However, Arya graciously declined his offer, thanking him for his concern. She explained that she couldn't take advantage of his kindness today because a carriage was already waiting for her. Before getting into the carriage, she suddenly threw herself into his arms, catching him off guard for the second time that day. Arya was genuinely overjoyed to see him after so many years, and as she snuggled closer to his chest, she whispered how thankful she was for the wonderful day they had shared. Washio, despite the awkwardness and inconvenience Arya had caused, realized he was glad to see her too. Time flew by, and after helping her into the carriage, Washio headed home on his own. Meanwhile, inside the carriage, Arya initially sat quietly, reflecting on the busy day. Her joy bubbled up, causing her human legs and spider limbs to tap the floor with excitement. Her long-held dream had finally come true. Thanks to her transformation, she was able to hug him at last. But as soon as she recalled how animatedly Washio had spoken about Claudia, her mood soured, and the smile slipped from her beautiful face. Arya felt a pang of anger as she remembered Washio's insatiable enthusiasm for the octopus girl. The mere thought of Claudia made her snort in frustration, and she turned her face toward the wall of the carriage. Realizing that dwelling on Claudia was only making her feel worse, she decided to distract herself by looking out the window. But as soon as she lowered her gaze, she noticed a white box wrapped in holiday ribbons sitting beside her. It was the gift she had brought for Washio, but in the whirlwind of the day, she had forgotten to give it to him. Now she wondered if it was too late to deliver it. Meanwhile, back at the academy, Claudia was in class when she asked about Washio's whereabouts. Noah casually mentioned that Washio had already left for the day and had been seen leaving with a beautiful black-haired girl. The news struck Claudia like a lightning bolt, and her face went completely pale as the realization set in. Arya had been deep in thought about what to do with the gift when she suddenly halted her carriage and bolted out like her life depended on it. Her heels clacked loudly across the wide square as she scanned every nook and cranny under the cover of night, desperately trying to find Washio. She peeked around every corner, into every shadowy alley, but it soon hit her like a ton of bricks. Washio had probably already gone home. Frustrated, she stomped her foot under a streetlight, raising the white box she was clutching. The only chance to give it to him would now have to wait until they were back at the academy. As she stood there, mentally kicking herself, the peace of the night was suddenly shattered by a chorus of panicked voices. People were running around her like it was the apocalypse, shouting about a fire at a church just a few alleys away. Without missing a beat, Arya took off toward the chaos, her heart racing with a mix of fear and curiosity. When she arrived, the scene was straight out of a disaster movie. The church was a blazing inferno, every floor engulfed in flames with smoke thick enough to blot out the stars. Arya froze, her jaw practically hitting the ground as she stared in disbelief. No one had a clue what started the fire, but the devastation was plain as day. People were scrambling everywhere, tossing buckets of water at the flames, but it was like trying to put out a bonfire with a squirt gun. Nearby, a group of kids, clearly caught in the fire's path, were being tended to with wet rags while they waited for the doctor. The men were hauling water like their lives depended on it, while the women shielded the crying kids, trying to keep them from seeing their home go up in smoke. The kids, terrified, were covering their ears to block out the horrifying sounds of crackling wood and the screams of their friends, probably wondering where they'd go once this nightmare ended. An older nun was frantically trying to get back into the church, but a guy was holding her back, keeping her from doing something seriously reckless. Tears were streaming down her face as she begged to be let go, convinced some kids might still be trapped inside. The door frame was already a blazing mess, making it way too dangerous to enter. Hearing the nun's desperate cries, Arya rushed over and asked if the kids were really inside. Choking on her words, the nun admitted it was possible, confessing that the fire might have started because the kids accidentally knocked over a candle while playing. She also blamed herself, admitting she'd been slacking off on her duties, thinking she could just fetch bread the next day instead of keeping an eye on things. Racked with guilt, she was now pleading for someone to save them. Arya, unable to leave the poor woman hanging, grabbed her hand, flashed a reassuring smile, and promised to handle it. Despite the crowd's warnings about the danger, Arya was determined and brushed off their concerns. She charged through the burning doors, covering her nose to avoid the choking smoke, and began scanning the corridor. The entire place was bathed in an eerie red glow, flames devouring everything in sight, with sparks flying and igniting new fires. Even though Arya had never quite mastered the water element, the urgency of the situation pushed her to give it a try on the fly. Time was running out. If she didn't find the child fast, the kid would be at serious risk of suffocation. Arya tore through each room, searching through the blaze, lifting boards, and desperately seeking any sign of life. She shouted at the top of her lungs, calling for any survivors, but the only answer was the relentless roar of the flames. Just when she thought she might be too late, she heard a faint cough, barely audible over the noise. Thanks to her sharp senses, Arya tracked down the source. She found a boy trapped under a fallen bookcase and, with a swift motion, snapped the bookcase in two and pulled him out. She laid him on his back, relieved that, even though he was unconscious, he was at least safe for now. But the fire had been raging for a while, and the building was in bad shape. Arya noticed that one of the support beams above them was cracked and about to collapse. She figured a lightning strike could destroy it, but there was a big problem. Using any kind of force might hurt the kid. The distance was too close, and any misstep could burn the boy badly. Just as Arya was wrestling with this dangerous dilemma, a noise from behind caught her attention. To her relief, a group of rescuers had arrived. They quickly took over, and just in time too, the support beam finally gave way. If they hadn't shown up, Arya might have had to pull off some heroic last-ditch effort to shield the kid from the falling debris. Suddenly, a dark, demonic arm shot out from above, blocking the collapsing ceiling. Arya looked up, and there it was, a creature with a bizarre animal skull for a head. It was Washio's summoned entity, a product of one of those spells he'd picked up during his travels in another world. The creature, obeying Washio's command without hesitation, held up the ceiling like it was no big deal. Meanwhile, Washio himself was busy summoning water, using it to fight the fire. Arya shielded her eyes from the falling debris and intense heat. When she finally dared to look again, she was greeted by an incredible sight. A swarm of beautifully crafted water fish swimming gracefully around her, dousing the flames. Her eyes widened in awe as she recognized the familiar magic. It had been 20 years since she last saw it, but Washio's spellwork was as powerful and stunning as ever. Once again, he had swooped in to save the day. To anyone watching, it would seem like Washio had returned to his glory days as the kingdom's top-tier magician, the legendary Golden Eagle. But Washio was never one to brag. Anytime someone mentioned his title, he'd just wave it off, acting like he was nothing more than a simple biology teacher. He often joked about getting old, calling himself an old man with a sore shoulder. Using magic had taken its toll on his health, so he was careful about when and how much he used it. A breathtaking spectacle unfolded as countless magical fish swam around the church, which had been completely filled with water. The once burning boards, books, and furnishings now floated like an elaborate aquarium display. People gathered outside the church, watching in amazement at this miraculous event. The entire church was submerged in water, top to bottom. One onlooker turned to his friend and asked if he was responsible for this miracle that had stopped the fire from spreading to nearby buildings. His friend, a humble baker, shook his head and explained that he didn't possess the magical skill for such a feat. The water had extinguished the fire entirely, revealing the beautiful magic at work. Water creatures glided effortlessly through the liquid, moving with grace. Amidst the crowd, a little girl who had been crying suddenly ran toward the water, her flower wreath fluttering in the breeze. Despite her mother's attempts to calm her, the child was captivated by the enchanting scene. As she approached the water, she gazed in wonder at the vibrant, shimmering fish. Entranced by their beauty, she instinctively reached out, trying to touch one of the magical creatures, though her hand passed through. Arya then emerged from the church, carrying a soot-covered child who lay motionless on her back. The crowd's amazement quickly turned to concern when they realized she had ventured into the blazing inferno despite the warnings. Many rushed over to ask if she was hurt, but the church minister spotted the child on her back and immediately called for a doctor. Arya reassured the minister that she had used healing magic on the child as soon as she found him, but agreed a doctor should provide additional care. The child's mother threw herself at Arya's feet, thanking her fervently and praying for her. The crowd erupted in cheers, their admiration for Arya growing. A tall man in the front, visibly relieved, noted that only a true monster girl could have performed such an extraordinary feat, flooding an entire church with water magic. His praise was echoed by others, who marveled at her abilities and speculated whether she was the legendary monster girl, or a new species with enchanting looks and formidable powers. As the crowd's questions and praise intensified, Arya tried to calm them, explaining that the magic wasn't entirely her own. She looked around, hoping to spot Washio, but he remained in the background, walking away with a briefcase on his shoulder, avoiding the attention. Arya wanted to acknowledge Washio's role in the miraculous rescue, but he seemed intent on staying unnoticed. With a wave of his hand, Washio urged Arya to accept the praise and not make a fuss. Reluctantly, she complied, staying amidst the crowd and enduring their enthusiasm. As Arya held her ground, the water magic began to fade, revealing the church beneath, now covered in soot and showing signs of the devastating fire. As the water dome finally disappeared, leaving behind no trace of its magical presence, the girl with the flower wreath looked visibly upset. The disappearance of the dome left her with a sense of loss, and she quickly turned toward the crowd, her eyes searching for the source of the magic. She spotted Arya beginning to walk away from the scene and rushed over to her, excitedly asking about the fish she had seen. Arya, with a warm smile, explained that it was all magic. She admitted that she didn't have Washio's incredible power, but she had managed to conjure a few magical fish just for the child. The girl's face lit up with pure joy, still absorbed in the wonder of it all. Arya then noticed the wreath on the child's head and inquired about it. The child recounted how, during the fire, an old stranger had approached her, placing flowers on her head and comforting her with words that everything would be all right. Even though she had been saddened by the church burning, the stranger's kind gesture had lifted her spirits. As the child continued to play with the magical fish, her smile grew wider, and she exclaimed how amazing magic was for making everyone smile. She now loved magic even more. Arya was touched by the child's innocent joy, which brought back memories from her own past. Arya recalled a time long ago, before she could transform, when Washio had given her a flower wreath for her spider body. She had been embarrassed and unsure how to react, awkwardly thanking him. She remembered feeling puzzled by his gift and wondering why he taught them magic when no one had asked him to. Washio's simple explanation had been that the secret to living well is giving. He believed that whether it was flowers, knowledge, or smiles, giving to others could improve one's mood and make life better. The act of giving, he said, helped both the giver and the receiver find happiness. As Arya gently stroked the little girl's face, Washio's affectionate voice echoed in her mind. He spoke about how the small, once timid spider had become a beacon of hope for those around her. It was this transformation and new sense of purpose that had inspired him to dedicate his life to teaching and helping others. For Arya, seeing the joy she could bring to others became a new meaning in life, just as it had for Washio. Arya had always aspired to make a difference, to help those in need. Despite the challenges she faced, including Claudia's interference, she was determined to live up to that promise. She envisioned herself as the next person to give Washio a flower wreath, a symbol of gratitude and hope. No matter where Washio went, Arya vowed to follow him, embodying the spirit of giving that had shaped her own journey. Standing outside the smoldering church, Arya continued to entertain the child, showing her new magic and ensuring her day ended on a high note. As the crowd dispersed and people began to head home, Arya finally made her way back, ready to embrace the new day at the academy. Exhausted from her efforts but content, she fell into a deep sleep, her body quickly succumbing to the rest it needed. With the arrival of a new school day, the academy buzzed with the latest gossip. The students, still shaken by the recent church fire in the central district, discussed the incident with excitement and curiosity. Most were unnerved by how close the blaze had come but were relieved that the fire had been controlled. Initially, many believed Claudia, known for her impressive skills, was the hero. However, the true savior had been Arya, who had just started her day at the academy. On the second floor, Arya stood engaged in a discussion about how quickly rumors could spread in such a bustling city. Despite Arya's reluctance to listen to the gossip, insisted she should be aware of the rumors circulating. Resentfully, Arya admitted that Washio had been the true force behind the miraculous rescue, while she had only managed a few basic water spells herself. Claudia, visibly disappointed by her lack of involvement, and missing the chance to see Washio's full magical prowess, eagerly awaited the day she could witness it firsthand. As the conversation continued, Washio approached them, curious about their discussion. Upon noticing him, both women paused. Arya, ever graceful, performed a deep curtsy and expressed her gratitude. She handed Washio a neatly wrapped gift, a white box tied with a beautiful ribbon. This small token was her way of thanking him for his guidance and support, which had helped her transform into the monster girl she was today. Washio, though unsure if he should accept the gift, was reassured by Arya's insistence and her reminder of his own philosophy that living is giving. With curiosity and anticipation, Washio opened the box right away, under Claudia's watchful and increasingly envious gaze. Inside was a tie adorned with an intricate spiderweb design. Washio's eyes brightened at the sight, but his excitement waned as Arya eagerly helped him put it on, her happiness evident as she admired how well it suited him. Claudia, feeling left out and unable to contain her jealousy, started to release her tentacles, intent on pulling Arya away from Washio. She was clearly annoyed by Arya's overly affectionate gesture. As the two argued over which tie pattern, spiderwebs or tentacles, would suit Washio better, many students passing on the first floor were oblivious to the commotion above. Washio, caught in the middle of the escalating argument, could only look on in confusion and ask them to stop. Washio carefully reviewed the form that Arya had just handed him, noting that her primary goal was to join the magical guard. Given Arya's exceptional magical abilities, Washio wasn't surprised. Among all his students, Arya stood out with her raw talent and potential, making her a strong candidate for the position. Regardless of the path she ultimately chose, Washio reassured her that he would support her every step of the way. Offering a warm smile, he promised to work tirelessly alongside her to help her achieve her dreams. Arya, overcome with enthusiasm, quickly enveloped him in a hug. Though slightly taken aback, Washio had grown accustomed to these spontaneous displays of affection from both Arya and Claudia. Despite the occasional surprise, he cherished these moments, finding deep satisfaction in seeing his students passionately pursue their aspirations. Though the road ahead would require even more effort to support their dreams, Washio had no regrets.
Alright, that's a wrap for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit like. And if you're new here, sub before the algorithm forgets I exist. Drop your favorite moment in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.